Well, we're diving headlong into the book of Daniel this morning. Over the past few weeks, we had been looking at the story of Jonah, and we kind of continue in this theme of prophets. And while Daniel was not always listed as a prophet, he really truly does act like a prophet, but in a different place and a different time than we're used to hearing about. In order to know the story of Daniel, we have to know the context in which it takes place. And the story of Daniel all takes place during what's known as the Babylonian exile. And throughout Israelite Jewish history, after God had brought them into the promised land, we see this whole story begin to unfold when eventually leads to a kingdom being ruled by David, and God covenants with David and says there will always be a ruler of your line sitting on the throne. And that goes for quite a while until the kingdoms divide, and all of a sudden we have Israel and we have Judah. Both Jewish nations, but divided monarchies, two different kings ruling in two different places. And the capital of Judah was Jerusalem. Now, in 597 BC, that nation of Judah was invaded by the people called the Chaldeans, or the Babylonians, and they were completely overrun. The king was taken off of the throne, and there was a puppet king sort of put in place that was going to serve the king of Babylonia, who was King Nebuchadnezzar. And King Nebuchadnezzar deported around 10,000 of Judah's most prominent citizens, professionals, priests, servants, the wealthy, the craftsmen, and they took them all and they relocated them to Babylon, the capital city of the Chaldeans. Now, these two maps will kind of show, here is Judah and Jerusalem here, and here is Babylonia and the city of Babylon right here. And so this just shows kind of the route that may have been taken as the exiles left Judah. And here's a more modern day map, and we have Jerusalem here, and as you can see in what is modern day Iraq, right south of Baghdad is what's known now as the ruins of Babylon. And that's where 10,000 Jews were deported. And that's where the story of Daniel really places us. They remained there for nearly 70 years. But one of the important things to understand about the Babylonian exile, unlike other exiles like that happened with the Assyrian Empire, those who came from Judah were allowed to kind of stay in their own communities to create sort of Jewish enclaves within Babylon. And so they were able to keep their religion, they were able to keep their practices, and they were able to kind of continue in their philosophical understandings of God and the world. And that's where we find Daniel. And as I was talking about with the children, Daniel is a very interesting figure because Daniel is an observant Jew. He's obeying the law. He is trying to do whatever he can to keep his Jewishness, to keep his faithfulness to God. He's trying to follow and obey all the laws of Moses in a foreign country, in a foreign land that wants him to assimilate to their culture and their ways. And some Jews did. They came over to Babylon. As we see, they've been there for 70 years. It's hard to imagine not catching on to some of the customs and some of the language. The ways that the Babylonians tried to assimilate was by giving different names to the Jews. And we'll find out later how Daniel and his friends were actually renamed in Babylon. But the beginning story, the beginning chapter of Daniel is important to showing Daniel's faithfulness to God and how far he was willing to go to honor God. Because as we discussed with the children, King Nebuchadnezzar wanted everyone in his royal court to be wise and well-fed. He wanted them actually to be, if we read the scripture passage, he wants his people to be without defect. He wants them to be in good physical form as well as mental form. And so he believes that maybe working with sort of the court nutritionist maybe at the time, that the best way to do that is to make sure they have enough protein and make sure that they feel comfortable and taken care of. And wine was the wonderful elixir of the day, and so why not supply wine and protein? And if we're thinking protein, we're probably thinking beef and pork and chicken and all the things we probably have today. But according to the law of Moses, every meat has to be prepared a certain way in order for it to be kosher, in order for it to be acceptable to eat. And there were some foods that were just not acceptable. They felt like it defiled the body to eat. And so even today, many observant Jews will not eat pork, won't eat bacon or a pork chop. Now, we don't know exactly what was being offered to Daniel and his friends, but we can assume that it probably was not being prepared according to the law of Moses. And they knew that, and they wanted to be faithful and obedient to God, so they said, we are going to do something different. We're going to be countercultural. Instead of eating the meat and drinking the wine, we're going to eat only vegetables and we're going to have water. Now, the overseer, the person that was over them, watching them, that was supposed to be providing with the rations, he had his orders. But God worked within the relationship with Daniel and that palace guard, and it was kind of a science experiment. Daniel kind of presented it that way. He said, well, let's do this. Give me 10 days. You give me and my friends only vegetables and water. Give all the other folks their meat rations and their wine, and let's see who comes out ahead. Let's see who comes out healthier, stronger, wiser. 10 days go by. Daniel and his friends are being obedient to God. Things are working in their life, and they come out, and they're healthier, they're stronger, they're wiser, so much so that King Nebuchadnezzar appoints them all to his inner circle, his inner court. And that will set the stage for the rest of the story of Daniel. We kind of say, well, all right, that's great, but what's the true purpose of this story? Why is it so important? I want you to say this with me. Accountability. Let's say that one more time, as loud as we can. Accountability. You see, Daniel has a plan. He has a goal. He has a dream and a desire to remain faithful and obedient to God in a foreign country, in a foreign land. Now, without some help, Daniel would not be able to reach this goal. It would be very difficult. If Daniel was the only person doing this, it wouldn't take long until the pressure was so fully upon him that he would have to assimilate, or that the guards would stop giving him what he wanted and force him to do what they wanted him to do. But he's got three wonderful friends. He's got Hananiah, who in Babylonian is now renamed Shadrach. He's got Mishael, or Meshach, as he's renamed, and Azariah, or Abednego. And the reason that Daniel and his friends are able to hold true and to remain faithful in their obedience to God, even in this, what seems like very trivial law of staying kosher, is because they have each other to hold one another accountable. They are able to tell each other, this is our goal, this is our hope, this is our vision. And when we say that, when we tell somebody else that, it can actually become real. Now let's take a look at ourselves, for instance. How many of us have ever wanted to lose weight in our lives? Come on, be honest. I can tell you. I have had a goal of losing about 20 or 25 pounds for about 2 years now. How much do you think I've lost? I've probably gained some weight, yeah. Thank you. I love when we tell the truth in church. But you're right. It's either fluctuated between gaining a few pounds, losing a few pounds, or staying about even. Really haven't gone anywhere, and you know why? Because I never told anybody about that. I never held myself accountable by telling somebody else who could check in with me and say, you know, how's that going? How's your nutrition plan going? How's your exercise plan going? You know, someone who may, in love, reach out to me and say, you know, you may want to, not order the large pizza this time. Or maybe you don't want to eat all of the Chipotle you just got. Save that one for another meal. But if we don't have those accountability partners, our goals and our dreams often fail because there is no one who is checking in to make sure that we're living up to what we're doing. And Daniel had that. He had his 3 friends, and they had Daniel, who were all checking in with one another to say, I know this is difficult. I know it's hard to stay strong when the porterhouse is out on the plate next to you, and you're over here eating your cucumbers and your bell peppers. But there's a purpose for this. There's a reason for this. It's about being faithful to God and honoring God with our whole selves, body, mind, and spirit. And in the Christian church, we're set up this way as well, to be accountable to one another. And that there are blessings to this accountability. How many of you have ever said to yourself, I really wish that I knew the Bible better, that I'd read the Bible? Okay? How many of you have ever said to yourself, I wish I prayed more often? How many of you have ever said, I wish that I could do more in mission and service during a given week or month? See, we all have goals. We have goals for our professional lives. We have goals for our personal lives. But we have goals for our faith lives as well, don't we? There are so many things, and so many times I myself and I've heard others say, boy, I really wish that I would have followed through on what I started. And sometimes my first question to myself and others is, did you have anybody to hold you accountable? That's what we try to do in our Bible Challenge group when we get together each month. We may not all have kept up with our reading, but it gives us an opportunity to check in and see where everybody is at and to give encouragement to keep going, to keep reading, even if you're behind. And small groups and prayer groups are a great way in our church to continue to check in with one another, to make sure that we're living up to that promise that we say that we're going to pray for all of these people that are on the front and the back of our bulletin each week. And it's a great way for us to check in with our own relationship with God. Are we actually communicating with God on a daily basis? Are we trying to honor God with our life and with our living? And small groups within the church are a perfect way to have some accountability to one another. If we say we're going to read the book of Daniel together and discuss it, and we say we're going to get together once a week or once a month to discuss these things, then that holds us accountable to coming to that group and putting in our time and our commitment, and not just giving it for ourselves, but for the group as well. Because we are givers and receivers in this relationship. We receive accountability from others, but we also can be there to hold others accountable. And you know what happens in the midst of that? We grow closer together as a community, grow closer in our relationships with one another and with Christ. And you know what that can do for our world? It can do some amazing things. Because when we are united, when we hold one another accountable to doing the work and the mission of Christ in our world, then we go out and we do it. We feed hungry people. We clothe the naked. We work at camps like Camp Courageous so that people with special needs can have the same camping and opportunities as every other child. We make sure that kids have the school supplies they need when they go back to school. We make sure that people know that Christ is in their life and that they can have a relationship with Christ as well. But it starts with holding one another accountable to those goals and dreams and visions that we have. And this fall, one of our challenges as a community is going to be deciding what is going to be our leading dreams and visions for this congregation, for our mission and service to Christ. Not only are we going to say those dreams out loud, but we're also going to plan for how we're going to hold one another accountable to living those out. Daniel is the success story. Daniel and his friends lived in Babylon, away from their homes, away from their people, away from their communities, but yet because they held on to one another and were accountable to one another, they survived in the land of Babylon, and they thrived in the land of Babylon. Let us thrive as Christians in our world today.